Dietrich Linghardt to join us. He's a physician with over 3 decades of experience who remains on the cutting edge of new treatment approaches to manage chronic illnesses. He has a long CV, I'll just curtail it. He's the founder of the Linghardt Institute. He's the head physician at the Sophia Health Institute in Seattle, Washington. He's also founder and chairman for the Institute of Neurobiology in Germany and Switzerland. I also know that he's an accomplished musician, but I don't think I can see your guitar here, Dietrich, so it's a real shame. Dietrich Linghardt.
Thank you. It's always difficult to come on after Jeanne Monroe. It's not the first time that happens. Jeanne is a big hero in the US. You know, she's really one of the most outstanding, recognized people in our field. So anyway, head up, head down, whatever to her. I got into this quite early. I did my doctoral thesis on the relationship of the autonomic nervous system with the immune system, which at the time in 1975, the only reason I got to do that was because nobody else wanted it, because all the professors at the time thought, you know, autonomic nervous system was something totally outdated. That's what we did in the early part of the 1900s, and nobody was interested, and I was not a popular medical student, and at that time I still had hair, and it was long. And so I ended up with something nobody else wanted, and it was the beginning of a career in autonomic nervous system. And I, in Germany, I was, when I grew up there as a young doctor, I was very involved in the growing alternative medicine field there, because I was living in an area where, I don't know, some of you here know Dr. Voll, who developed electroacupuncture. He was my parents' physician, and I was early on sort of steeped in homeopathy and acupuncture and all that, and then combined my interest in the autonomic nervous system with what I learned there. And after moving to the US, there was a very different legal system, and the first thing I found out, I wasn't allowed to use any of my German instruments. And the only thing that was safe in the US was my hands and my brain. And so I adopted the American applied kinesiology and modified it so that I could use it as a diagnostic system. And this has led me down the path, and I share some of the insights gained from it. So, first of all, just a few general remarks, and then I promise that you don't have to strain your brain with me. I'm a simple guy, and it's not going to be exhausting. So, the first thing is, when we deal with chronic illness, of course, most chronic illness now is Lyme disease in one way or another, according to me. It's a chronic infection, you know, that has a plethora of symptoms and signs and biodiversity. But the things that we need to look at is just simple stuff. So chronic illness has 3 components, I say here. First of all, it has a genetic setup, and I will emphasize today the epigenetic setup, which most of you will not be aware of. And then there is the environmental triggers that we get, and then there is the immune response of the individual to toxins and microbes and parasites. And there really isn't anything more to it. And I just want to point you to point 3. There was in 1972, one of the leading physicians in the US, Lewis Thomas, had this wonderful quote that he defined chronic illness. He said, "The response of the host makes the disease." So he says 99% of the symptoms that we have in chronic illness is not the bug that invaded us or the toxin that's stored in us. It's our immune response to that. and that we can modify, you know, and definitely Jeanne Monroe is worldwide the leader in doing that. But here's sort of what we do, sort of in our practice. We focus on a few things. First thing, we do what everybody else does. We look at the, the basic physiology. We know now that everyone should exercise for 30 minutes a day. That's more emphasized in the US. They're more, you know, because Hollywood has discovered exercise, you know, 30 years ago, and so everybody wants to look like somebody in Hollywood, and so everybody exercises. And it has turned out to be more important than we knew, that, you know, for every 30 vitamin pills you take, 5 minutes of exercise will probably give you more health benefits than that. So we're looking at that and instructing patients accordingly with the diet. Diet is a really, really difficult one because of the individual biochemistry of the individual. Some people do well on a microbiotic diet, others need high protein, others need the high fat diets that are around now. Other ones with Lyme disease, the McDougall diet, it's a completely fat-free diet that we do for a few months. You know, the microbes and biofilm, and that's really what chronic illness is. There's biofilm bugs that have organized themselves, their communities, in a very, very intelligent way. And we know we need over 1,000-fold the dose of an antibiotic to kill the bugs in biofilm than we need to kill bugs that are floating around in the tissue or in the blood. And so the bugs in the biofilm, they only eat fatty acids. And so by depriving the body of any fatty acids, you can starve the microbes in the biofilm. And I get to that later. And my main strategy in treating Lyme in very, very simple ways is do the McDougall diet, starve them of fatty acids, and then create liposomal herbal compounds. You know, liposomes look like fat on the outside, but on the inside they contain a water-soluble microbe-killing herb or drug, and so it's like a Trojan horse. So you make the biofilm bugs hungry, they eat what you give them, looks like fat, and then they absorb it into the biofilm and release, and then they chew up the fatty envelope, and what it released inside is the toxin that diminishes them. And so it's an old trick, but that is underused, I think, in our community. And when you work that way, then you can use herbs instead of antibiotics, because an herb that's weak on its own becomes a nuclear bomb when you make it liposomal. So I'll get into that towards the end of my talk. So one of the other things that we know is that the microbes establish themselves by releasing biotoxins in our system. I have a whole list that I'm not going to show you of over 2,000 biotoxins that commonly are found in our body. They're extremely expensive to test for. We can test 3 mycotoxins in the urine, and that test in the US costs $800, and so we don't do that anymore. We'd rather focus on the treatment. But so the second point here, to decrease the toxic body burden, we know that, for example, aluminum works as a growth factor for Lyme disease, for Borrelia burgdorferi, and pretty much every microbe in our system can utilize the environmental toxins stored in our tissue as a growth medium or as a protective medium. We know that Candida, for example, can store up to 200-fold its own body weight in heavy metals in its outer envelope. And so our strategy has always been to deplete the body of toxic metals, of chemicals, of biotoxins, as a simple strategy to weaken the microbes before any attempt to kill them. What I'm really getting at is, like, you know, if you only use one tool, IV antibiotics, you need a lot of it for a very long time. If you actually weaken the community of pathogens in the system by depleting them of what they need to establish themselves, you can work with beautiful biological material without having to get into the toxic aspects of medicine. The third part here is the immune modulation, you know, that is so hugely important in treating chronic illness, to recognize what the body is reacting to, and then normalizing the body's immune reaction. And I again want to say that Jeanne Monroe and her team with Dr. Puri and others is really the world leader in this. And then the last one, really the last step, not the first one, in treating chronic illness is decreasing the microbial burden. And I think most people, including my friends from ILADS and other groups, have it the wrong way, you know, to start with the killing early on rather than preparing the ground for that event. So the actual phase when you kill bugs with antibiotics or with antimicrobial herbs should be at the end, and it should be short and sweet. And it should be, I do believe, you know, from the early studies on Lyme disease, when we did tissue biopsies as the only means to diagnose it, that was Alan MacDonald did this beautiful work where he took 10 patients that had completely recovered from Lyme disease. They were 2 years symptom-free, and did tissue biopsies on them. And in all of them, all of the samples, he found very well alive and happy Lyme spirochetes. And so the new approach really in our field is to not focus on total eradication of the bugs, because we know, the insiders know, it's not possible. What we can do, we can decrease the body burden, and we can make the immune system like an intelligent gardener to host the few bugs that are surviving. And most of us who've had Lyme disease need some lifelong biological support to keep the bugs at bay. And we do that with some simple herbs, for example, Japanese knotweed, which as a side effect has its own life elongating effect, anti-aging effect, you know, and has multiple positive other effects on many systems, and is one of the most powerful antimicrobial agents against the Lyme spirochetes. You know, that's in the references to that are in Stephen Booner's book, Buhner, you know, Treating Lyme. He's a wonderful scientific herbalist in the US. Good. Here's just a short view of some of the things we're looking at, you know, in the chronic ill patient, and we do that very quickly, you know, with the muscle testing based system that I use. These 10 points we go through in less than 20 minutes. We scan the patient for the things that are common. The reason we look for common things first is because they're common, you know, and they're most commonly overlooked. And so the first issue I always look at is toxicity. We do our manual scan first on the patient, and then we confirm that with using a variety of the lab tests that are available. You know, there is the urine challenge test, there's stool testing, there's hair analysis, and there is the urine porphyrin test. And so depending on, I have to be honest here, so when you have a good muscle testing based system, you really do not need lab work, because our testing is more sensitive than the lab testing is, and has become very, very accurate. We're sort of around the 90% level of accuracy, of validity and reliability. And so we scan the patient for toxicity, and very often I introduce as a very first strategy a detox program. I use medical drugs like injectable DMSA, DMPS, oral D-penicillamine, EDTA, sodium EDTA, calcium EDTA. But we do more and more. There is a brilliant neurologist, I think she's here in the room, Margarita Grace-Bresson, who did a wonderful study, this is now 15 years ago, where she experimented with natural detox systems and found out that a combination of taking oral cilantro, Chinese parsley, combining it with an electrolyte ionic foot bath, had more dramatic releases of really all toxins measured across the board than any medical injectable detox agent. This is having a 20-minute foot bath every night and taking a few pipettes full of cilantro tincture. She has the data, and we already asked Professor Puri if you would take those data at some point, crunch them, and publish this, because it is the most effective of all the detox methods I've scanned across the globe, and it costs pennies a day, and it works, and it's based on the combination of biophysics and biochemistry. Then I do a lot of psychological work with my patients. I don't want to go too deeply into that. Some of you have been to my workshops. We use a combination of family constellation work and individual biofeedback psychotherapy. The big elephant in the living room is the electromagnetic radiation right now, and I'll show you some science on that. The infections, of course, are huge. In the US, we're struggling a lot with mold because of the way the buildings are made in the US. Basically, the US buildings, including banks and schools, are basically cardboard boxes wrapped around with plastic, and they're perfect mold-growing institutions. And so it's a huge issue there. Even though you have a lot of rain here, your buildings are usually made of materials that are much less likely to grow mold in them. But if they do, it's bad. And then we look at parasites. Most chronic Lyme patients develop intestinal parasites that's hugely underdiagnosed because there is no proper lab work anywhere in the world other than if you go to India. I worked for 3 years in India and worked with a brilliant parasitologist and who taught me how to diagnose with a microscope. The poop needs to be diagnosed within 15 minutes before the parasites autolyse and become undetectable. What do? We collect the poop, we put it in the mail, it sits on the shelf in the lab for a week, and then we look for the parasites, and no, sir, you do not have parasites. I have 1,000 stories on that one. I'm not going to go into that. PANS and PANDAS, a chronic tonsillitis, is huge in the Lyme community, especially in younger people, and hugely overlooked. I'm not going to go into that, but it's Jeanne referred to the chronic strep that she treats with long-term antibiotics. I treat it with the Bravo yogurt. Some of you are aware of it. HPU, hemopyrolactamuria, is a condition induced by Lyme, commonly overlooked, where there's one of 8 enzymes are blocked that for the formation of the heme molecule. And if you have that, you make an incomplete heme molecule. That first of all means your hemoglobin becomes an inefficient carrier of oxygen. But the heme molecule is also part of the phase 1 liver detox. You can't properly detox. And there's a whole slew of other things. Basically, it leads to the supraphysiological excretion of vitamin B6 and zinc, and those need to be substituted in supraphysiological amounts. It's not uncommon in my office that we give people 600 or 400 milligrams of B6 instead of 30, and then we give them, 200 milligrams of zinc for a while until the condition settles. CCSVI is a common outcome in chronic Lyme. That's a stenosis of the anterior neck veins. And what that does is, if the blood flows in the brain, it can come out. You get increased intracranial venous pressure, leads to leakage of red blood cells into the brain tissue. The iron that's released from the red cells causes oxidative damage, and that's the demyelination. That's Zamboni's work from Italy. We find that even in 6- and 7-year-old autistic children. It's a huge overlooked part of problem, and we used to treat it with a balloon procedure, a conventional cardiology procedure, dilating the vein from inside. Now we found a way of manual treatment, a combination of manual treatment and several items that you take orally that repair the inner lining of the veins and opens that up. I'm not going to go into that because that's a whole day lecture, but it's a huge issue. Dental issues are huge. I heard that in England, dentists are still placing amalgam fillings. It's pretty much the last country in the world to do that. I have to point that out to you, that with all its pioneering history, England has now falling way behind the curve in terms of attending to the health of its own people. Brainwave biofeedback is huge at the late stage of Lyme treatment. When the infection is mastered and the toxins are out, you're often still left with a dysfunctional brain, simply desynchronized brain waves, and that can be easily fixed with different forms of biofeedback equipment. And then last but not least is it's a mistake in Lyme to try to fix the hormones as a primary issue, because the hormonal disturbance in Lyme patients is largely adaptive. We have many papers that show, for example, if you have babesia and take testosterone, it makes the babesia much, much more virulent and much more infectious. And so just a warning to the anti-aging docs here in the room, the hormone-pushing, bioidentical hormone people. Again, that's something that should come late in the treatment, not early on. And when you read the literature, there is 3 neuroregulatory neuropeptides that really regulate all the hormones. It's oxytocin, antidiuretic hormone, also called vasopressin, and melatonin. And those are the 3 that we're correcting. And then what you see is that the estrogen smoothes out, the progesterone goes up, the testosterone normalizes without ever giving the hormones. We do that purely with homeopathic dilutions of those 3 regulatory neuropeptides. It's overlooked in the medical community for whatever reasons. The higher you go up in the chain of events, in the chain of command, the more effect you have with much less. So this is just a little bit of an overview. So now I'm just going to make it much more easier. I want to get into the epigenetics, and let me just give you what you're going to hear, and then you're going to hear it again. We are all exposed to a huge amount of radio waves, the microwave radiation used for cell phone communication. We're all exposed to a huge amount of toxins every day. We know that leads to epigenetic changes. That's how our DNA is transcribed in irrational, non-life affirmative ways. And we know that that damage is passed on to our children, and they have their own exposures in the womb and then throughout their lifetime. And then when they have children, they're passing on to their children the accumulated damage, which is at least twice as much as what they've received. And so it grows exponentially from generation to generation. And Stephanie Seneff, who's considered by many of us the leading researcher in the US in science, has calculated that by 2025, half the children born will be autistic because of this chain of events. And the relationship of boys to girls in autism was always considered 4-to-1, but it's really 18-to-1. And when you take that number, then you can figure out that by the year 2025, only 10 years from now, 1 in 20 boys born will be normal. And I feel for my girls. I have young girls. Where are they going to find a boy? We're going to find a normal man. It's not going to be there. We're heading for a big disaster at an incredible speed. So I write here, any psychological or physical trauma, exposure to electromagnetic radiation or toxins can cause epimutations, epigenetic changes that are passed on vertically to the offspring. Okay, so in animal models, this has been followed for 7 generations and generally led to the study's family line dying out. So epimutations lead to an increasing loss of fertility, which many of you are aware of. We are already fully in this, and it's going to get worse from generation to generation until the only healthy sperm you can find is on the sperm bank, and the only healthy egg you can find frozen eggs somewhere in a research institution. We're heading for that very, very quickly. So we are now in the 3rd generation of humans being exposed to microwave, glyphosate, and other toxic insults that never existed in human history before. We are only 1 or 2 generations away from a war that was by far the most traumatic ever, and that's the environmental war, you know, sort of that we are facing. It's huge, and I think most of us are aware of the severity of it, but we like to not look there and think, well, it can't really be that bad, because if it was, we would read it in the Sunday Times, right? Yeah, or see it on TV, and it ain't there. So here's just a little bit on the science, and I keep that simple, but it's actually fun to look at it. So this was at the University of Zurich. They basically took young rats and stressed them. They did it with just sometimes not giving them food, sometimes exposing them to colder temperature than what's normal for them, occasionally giving them small electroshocks under their feet. Nothing really horrible. Even as an animal lover, I thought, okay, that wasn't too bad. But these rats developed anxiety and depression when they were older. And I can't tell you how a depressed rat looks like, but you can see it. You know, I've seen those animals, and you can see with one look, these things are depressed. They still were fertile, so they had children. And the amazing thing was, and then what they did, they raised the baby rats with great love. They played the music, they gave them the best food and everything, and still they developed the same anxiety and same depression that the parents had. They followed that for 7 generations. After 7 generations, none of the rats had babies anymore. So that's when the thing stopped, the experiment. And so then they repeated the experiment in St. Louis in the US, and realized it could just be a single negative experience in the first couple of weeks of life of the rats that would trigger that. And that would be passed on. And they realized very quickly it was a change in how the DNA in the hippocampus is methylated. You know, so that's where it brings the whole methylation thing in. You know, and some of you are misled currently by the genetic testing. You know, you're looking for the MTHFR mutations or so on. When the patient doesn't have them, you say, oh, well, that can't be a problem. Well, the DNA testing doesn't tell you about the epi mutations, which are by a factor of over 1,000 times more prevalent than the genetic causes of it. So it's pretty much all of us need to be on methylation support, because all of you had parents or grandparents in the First World War and the Second World War and times of starvation. I remember when I was 17, I came to the UK on a motorcycle on a trip and wanted to buy an apple. And I went to 3 or 4 grocery stores before I could find an apple. And I remember there were these shelves of fruit. There were like 2 apples on the shelf, 1 little thing of grapes on another shelf, and distant in the store, like 1 orange. That was the fruit that was available. This is 1967, you know. And so what I really want to say is most of your parents, or maybe some of you, grew up in a time of certain nutrient depletion, which will also contribute to this. So I'm going to scroll forward. So many other studies that shows that chemical toxins that we're exposed to during pregnancy, when we're in the womb, decreases our fertility. And now, again, the sentence, these changes are passed on epigenetically to the offspring, generation after generation, until this family dies out. Original text from the abstract. Yeah, and then emotional stress in the womb leads to epigenetic changes and psychiatric illness in adulthood. Yeah? We see a lot of teenagers now that become wacky and weird and strange. And yes, they all have Lyme disease, but they all have contracted Lyme disease in the womb. And that is really the cause of most autism and most strange things. But there can be that strange delay time. They may come out normal or looking normal. They may have some behavioral problems in school, but nothing much. And then when they're 16 or 17, they have their psychiatric breakdown. You know, so we see that a lot. And the other factors here, smoking, alcohol, they're very well known. Environmental toxins are now in pretty much every study on epigenetics. The environmental toxins are right there mentioned on the first line. That's new. Okay, and then here, a little bit getting into the Lyme proper, the effect of prenatal infection and the effect on brain development and behavior. Permanent neurodevelopmental changes, mediated via methylation cycle abnormalities. And again, this is not the MTHFR mutation you see on the 23andMe test or other tests. We will not see it on the genetic test. We do not have adequate testing for epigenetics. It's not out there yet. It may be at Breaksphere. I mean, I'm hoping, that you guys are pioneering that, but all we have is a damn genetic test, which doesn't tell us much, because you may have beautiful functioning epigenetics, that make up for a gene defect. But if you have a healthy gene and you have epimutations, the gene cannot be transcribed properly. You still have the whole slew of trouble. Okay, I'm going to, actually the pioneer of this whole work, like many pioneers, is English, David Barker. It's called the Barker hypothesis. Stress in the womb causing mutations which will lead to the sudden onset of illness later in life. And he looked at diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension, but he was a pioneer with his work in 1995. Here is the wonderful methylation cycle. I'll just put it in here to show you that I know what it is. So here just one of the many things, for this talk I had to kind of eliminate a lot of things from the abstract, but here's one that links epigenetic and autism to a defective sulfation, which is at the end. Sulfation is here at the bottom of the. I don't know if you can see it. It's down here. Is where different sulfur precursors are changed to sulfate, which is an important building block for a lot of proteins and other things in the system. And if your methylation cycle doesn't work because your grandfather was in the Second World War, you can't make sulfate. That's really what I'm saying here. And you can't make glutathione, and you can't make taurine, you can't make a whole bunch of other things. You can't methylate your DNA properly. And that is overlooked in our field, that you guys here, whatever, most of you are younger than me, but all of you had parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents in the world wars setting these changes. There's never been wars like that before. The Second World War was really the war of all the wars. There's never been trauma like this, not even in the Greek times or Roman times. There's never been trauma like that. And then since the end of the Second World War, Monsanto moved in Europe, and all of you have been poisoned, some of you intentionally. We know that a lot of the celiac disease is directly related to the juxtaposition of glyphosate on the wheat used as a drying agent, and that's why we became allergic to wheat when we weren't before. This is all new. So we're in a period now that's affecting our epigenetics like never before. And much of the chronic illness we see now is because of that, not because of the bugs have changed, have become more invasive, or the climate change, all the things that are discussed otherwise may be cofactors. But this is a big one that's been overlooked. And so what does it mean for treatment? We need to look at the factors involved in methylation that we can support with. This is Amy Yasko's picture here. So there is a lot of simple things that we can do. We need to look at zinc, manganese, magnesium. We need to look at vitamin B1, B2, B3, B6, B12. By the way, they should never be given together. They should be given separately. The B complex thing, most people become allergic to it and don't absorb it anymore. That's pretty much and you want to definitely give people methylated folate. Some of you do methylated B12 injections. It's in that realm. People need to be checked for that. I use the muscle testing has turned out to be the quickest and most accurate tool, because it can be that you're methylated B12 and methylated folate deficient in the brain, but you have too much in the kidney and too much in the heart, and then you do a blood test. Well, when you do a blood test, you're testing for a nutrient in the blood. You're not testing for it in the brain, and that's so misunderstood, that blood testing is a foul approximation of what you may need. And with the energetic testing, and I'm making a big plea for it here, you can actually get the body's response to see, do you need it or you don't need it? Because every body tissue has a different need and a different level, and the blockages that we have are tissue specific. And so, if your main symptoms are brain related, then you need to up the methylated folate level in the brain. And if you do a blood test, it's not going to show you what's in the brain, it's going to show you what's in the blood, and there may be plenty. But if the blood-brain barrier is close towards that item, the only way they can show it is a brain biopsy or an intelligent form of muscle testing, the energetic testing. I just put that in here. I know it's supposed to be a scientific conference, but I'm speaking to you as a scientist that these methods should not be disregarded because the science behind them is shaky, but the practical application of it has been validated 1,000 times. Okay, I'm going to move a little further forward. So here's the methylation factors. I didn't know I had the picture. Do you guys get the PowerPoints on memory stick? Get access to it? So, yeah, so I can skip over some things because people will have access to it. Okay, so you got the complete list here of the methylation things that you need to test for. Good. Electrosmoke and its destructive effect on the brain. It's huge and it's everywhere, and some of it is sinister. The best study on electrosmoke you see here. That's a classroom has devised that biology experiment was in a class in a school where by decision of the school management, wireless was instituted in the school in every classroom. Many kids started getting nauseous, feeling dizzy, started getting headaches. The learning went down, the teachers observed that, and so they did this experiment. They put a tray of sprouts close, like where the first line of the students were, closest to the wireless router, which was in front of the classroom, and another tray of sprouts in the back of the classroom, furthest away from the wireless router that was in the classroom. And so you see the results here. You see what happens. So left side was far away from the wireless router, the right side close to it. My question to the parents when I talk to schools is, how do you want the neurons of your brain of your child to look like? Like the one on the left side or the one on the right side? That study for me says more than all the other studies that we have. Here's just a simple graph of the power density that we're exposed to from 2000 to 2011. There's been this absolutely insane increase of that, completely unmonitored by the world's governments. Here's a study from Roger Santini. That was at a time when it was still possible to have a community that had no wireless reception. So what he did, he passed out a questionnaire to all the people in the little town in the Pyrenees that was, and then again 6 months after they put a cell phone tower into the village and had cell phone reception, and what you see basically is the increase of symptoms. So this line, the 0 line, was the line before they put the thing in, and then the moment the cell phone tower was up, there was a bunch of symptoms, and this is the distance from the, here's the cell phone tower, and this is the distance, 300 meters. So after 300 meters, you still have a significant increase in daytime fatigue and insomnia at night, which are really the main key symptoms. People not sleeping and being tired during the day, or not having restorative sleep. And in London, we checked on a graph, nobody who lives in the greater London area is further away than 300 meters from the next cell phone panel. So this is all of you. And this is like by far the best study from the University of Athens, from Adamantia Fragopoulou, a wonderful researcher. And they took a lab model where they can test for 1,000 metabolic enzymes that we have in our system, and exposed them to just a cordless phone, the one that you have in the kitchen where you can take the headset, go walk around in the house. Wherever you have reception, you get that radiation, which is also microwave-based. And then also used the regular cell phone radiation, the ambient radiation that's in every house pretty much, and found that out of the 1,000 proteins, 143 are permanently destroyed. It's about 1/6 to 1/7 of what makes us alive gets destroyed by that. And that's right, sitting here in the room, you're all exposed to it, to what was used in this model. And so, there is a 1,000 study. This one from George Carlo shows the relationship with autism. But the reason I show this one here is this line that he proved that especially the enzymes that are needed to excrete toxic metals are completely blocked by our daytime exposure to ambient cell phone radiation, which of course explains a lot of the symptoms that we see in people, or a lot of the clinical cases that we have. He's from Henry Lai. He summarized up all the studies a few years ago that were there, but the main thing that you need to know is the cell phone radiation does cause DNA strand breaks with that cancer, and there's a whole host of other things. I'd like to point out the calcium, because you learned a little bit about calcium from Jeanne Monroe today. The calcium influx in the cell is basically a bad thing that's accountable for a lot of symptoms of that we see in our chronic ill patients. And Marty Paul just published a paper a few months ago showing that the ambient cell phone radiation that we're all exposed to causes a permanent influx of calcium in our cells, with all the consequences that brings. What do we do? Yes, we measure body voltage. We measure with different instruments in homes. We measure what people are exposed to. And we measure 24-hour urine melatonin level, which is a wonderful, simple test to see what the cumulative exposure is. The cumulative exposure leads primarily to a lack of production of melatonin. And if you read the papers on melatonin lately, I mentioned before, it's a super hormone that regulates all of the sex hormones, the adrenals. It's above the ACTH and all the things that you've learned in kindergarten. The high school is, look at oxytocin, it's higher up in the regulation. And melatonin is also, and if you destroy that, you have destroyed the whole system downstream. I did a study. I don't have the study here, no. I did a study on 10 children with autism, and found out when they were in the womb, they were exposed to over 20-fold the microwave radiation than our control group. So autism, in most cases, is a direct outcome of the exposure in the womb to cell phone radiation, to microwave. From the cordless phone in the kitchen that looks so innocent, and the Wi-Fi router in your living room, or the cell phone tower close to your house. Those are the main sources of autism. Everything else is secondary to that, including the vaccine damage and all the other things discussed. They're all secondary phenomena. Okay, so what do? We protect people, my patients, not just the autistic kids, but we are huge in protecting. So first things, no wireless in the home, no cordless phones. That's the ground rule for health at this age. The children, we have wear at school radioprotective clothing if the school is forcing wireless into the schools. Rosemary tincture has been found to be highly protective against microwave and other forms of radiation. So is propolis, by the way. And then in the evening, we give pretty much every person alive now liposomal melatonin, because all of us are exposed to excessive amount of radio waves, whether we know it or not. And we often work with 5-hydroxytryptophan to give them a good starting dose, because melatonin is so extremely protective. By the way, some people get a hangover effect in the morning from melatonin, and we give them 5 milligrams of cortisol, which is the natural antidote for melatonin, which is great anyway in the morning because it gives you energy. It's physiologic dosing of it that has only positive side effects. Good. And then at night, most important thing is to turn the fuses off for the house to get some electric calm. We use a particular kind of bedding from Austria. It's called the Samina bed. And we use a sleep sanctuary that looks like this. This is looks like a mosquito net that's draped over the bed at night and is made from silver-coated cloth called Swiss Shield. You can Google that and buy the cloth. It's expensive because silver ain't cheap. But it's fantastic. It reduces the radiation under the sanctuary to 1/10,000th of what it otherwise would be. And that's usually a level that most people can be healthy with. I spend so much time on the electrosmoke here because for me, it's the elephant in the living room. Everybody sees it, everybody is in it, and nobody talks about it. And certainly people are not willing to draw the conclusion. Parents are willing to sacrifice their children to have wireless in the house, to not give up that piece of cable that hooks up their computer, destroy permanently the brain of the growing fetus and the young children, to not give up that piece of cable. And I don't understand it. It's not in me anywhere where I can understand that. But anyone, there's some wonderful groups here in England, attending to this issue. They're all struggling. The science is out. It's not like there's no science behind it. The science is all out now. It should be attended to. Okay, next issue, toxicity. So we need two things to become toxic: exposure and individual susceptibility. Remember, the greatest factor in susceptibility is if you're sleeping with your wireless on, you're completely blocking your detox enzymes. You can't detox. Detox happens at night. That's why we focus so much on the night. The umbilical cord studies on newborn babies showed that we are all born toxic since 50 years. That is true. It's an estimated 82,000 chemicals that are in our environment now, and all of them can be found in our body. Most published in the past is our exposure and the consequences to xenoestrogens. Those of you who have not read that book, you have to read it, Our Stolen Future. It is still, it's 20 years old, but it's still the gold standard that we recommend. And then a recent focus on, amongst the 82,000, one chemical has moved to the top of the chain, and that's glyphosate, the main ingredient of Roundup. And in England, we looked at it, 220 other products have Roundup in it as their primary chemical. It's used as an herbicide on golf courses. So golf courses, female golfers have 4 times the incidence of breast cancer than the normal population. Male golfers, much higher incidence of prostate cancer. So don't golf. In England, it's by degrees better because you have natural rain here, and the grooming of the golf courses doesn't require as much as, for example, in Hawaii or especially in Arizona or places like that. And if you pick up your golf ball, pick it up with gloves and throw the gloves away after each game. These are just some simple things. So a little bit on glyphosate. Glyphosate disrupts the endocrine, is an endocrine disruptor, and disrupts many of the functions of our healthy gut bacteria, damages DNA. And here is a summary of what it does. It's the primary cause, not one of many, the primary cause of hypertension, of primary cause of type 1 and type 2 diabetes, primary cause of obesity, primary cause of all the fatty acid disorders, high cholesterol, high LDL cholesterol. When we see that, we immediately do the urine test for glyphosate. It is hugely involved with Alzheimer's disease. We hear today also that there's a huge link, Alzheimer's and Lyme disease, but there's no Lyme in the brain without glyphosate being there first. Parkinson's is huge. MS, glyphosate is huge. Autism is absolutely huge. These are all published. They're not my ideas. And then we go down the list, all the huge link to many cancers, especially bladder. We see a huge increase. I know there is also a link with Lyme disease and bladder cancer, but also with glyphosate and bladder cancer. Pancreatic cancer is almost entirely caused by glyphosate in my experience. It's huge. So here a little bit, sort of that glyphosate and aluminum work beautifully together as a tic-tac-toe system. Glyphosate is in all the British food. We tested many different types of food. In England, we couldn't find one food that didn't have glyphosate on it. That includes, unfortunately, organic food. Here it has less on it, but it still has. And so when you eat glyphosate, glyphosate is primarily acts as a chelating agent. It binds up all the trace minerals in your food and makes them unabsorbable, with one exception, that's aluminum. It binds to aluminum, transports it across the gut membrane, and transports it straight to the brain. And so there's a huge link, glyphosate exposure to depression, dementia, anxiety disorder, Parkinson's disease, even in young people. Many of the gut bacteria are actually in charge of producing the amino acids that we need, or breaking down the proteins that we eat to amino acids. And one of the major ones is tryptophan. So there's a direct link between tryptophan deficiency and the glyphosate in the food. And tryptophan is a precursor for serotonin and for melatonin. I mentioned before, melatonin is huge in terms of our hormonal regulation, but it's also huge in terms of a primary detox agent the brain uses. It's not glutathione, it's melatonin. That's some of my British friends that I have, sort of have overlooked that piece of the literature. There's still glutathione junkies, and glutathione has never done much for the brain. It's melatonin. When you get it in there, there's a miracle. Aluminum and glyphosate together destroy the pineal gland with a lot of issues. Okay, so let me see. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong direction here. A beautiful German study that shows the more glyphosate you have in your pee, the sicker you are. So they're directly linking chronic illness with the amount of glyphosate you have in you. And so we have different tests in the US, they're not relevant here. That's a study I was involved with, where we looked, each one of these bars, these blue bars, is the content of a particular toxin in mother's milk. Every one of them is a different sample of a different mother. And so the tiny little bit of blue means there was very little of it in it, and there's huge amounts in it. And these are flame retardants that are outgassing from your laptop computer. Whenever you're working on the laptop, it heats up, it warms up. At least the older one now, I know there's the new steady state ones that don't warm up anymore, which is a good idea. But the ones that warm up outgas flame retardants that you absorb through your hands in very significant amounts. And this is where this comes from. It's also in mattresses and other things. And so, but what you need to know, this big black line here, that's the bar that the American EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, sets. Any fluid that has more concentration of this particular chemical in it than this bar is not allowed to be disposed of in the toilet. And we have 6 breast milks that are crossing this bar. You think about it. So how do we detox glyphosate? It's a bit complex, and you're going to have the PowerPoint, but I like to highlight this here. This is my form of low-dose immunotherapy. Let me explain what Jeanne Monroe basically does. When you take a toxin, an offending agent that you have a huge reaction to, and you dilute it, there is a certain step of the dilution where the toxin becomes its own antitoxin. And the art is to find what dilution that is. I had the simple idea, based on some of the teachings I got in my early years in Germany, well, in the pea, you have all the toxins, at least the ones that your body is still able to process. And if we dilute those toxins homeopathically, there should be a certain dilution of the urine that's a perfect antidote for the toxins in the system. Yeah? And we do that, we make a serial dilutions very similar to what Dr. Monroe does. And we use the muscle testing in this case to determine what the dilution is that gives the perfect antidote. And that has been absolutely huge, because with that, we don't have to figure out anymore which one of the 82,000 chemicals is this patient processing right now, which one is he struggling with. We simply do the urine dilution and use that for our immunotherapy. We actually inject it, we dilute it, we put it through a micropore filter, we figure out the dilution, and then we inject a small bubble under the forearm about once every 7 weeks, so it's not like a frequent thing, and it resets the whole system of the patient in beautiful ways. And that's our core thing of how we deal with glyphosate and how we deal with Lyme disease, how we wind down the system so the patient's symptoms become much lessened. The other things I point out very briefly here, so glycine, I think, would be the top of the list of the vitamin type things that we give. Core is a patented product in England, that's also available here. It's a mix of zinc, manganese, different forms of vitamin B6, biotin, and has some molybdenum in it, for the sulfur processing and some other things. But the core, the other thing is binders. Yeah, I know my institute has a little table outside, and one of the main binders now in the literature are different forms of zeolite, and I like to just mention that here. Zeolite is a natural volcanic product. It's really, the chemical formula is aluminum silicate, kind of scary. It's got aluminum in it. And it's a porous structure that carries a huge negative charge that absorbs into it positively charged toxic material. And some zeolites are already, because they have a natural affinity for toxins, some are already heavily loaded with lead and toxic crap that's in it. And so it's very, 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 very delicate to make the right choice which zeolite to use, and so we will make a proposal out on the table. I'm sorry, I'm not here to sell anything, but it's just really, I heard that some people are using here the liquid zeolite, which is an absolute crime against humanity. If you dilute it with acid, you liberate the aluminum that's in it, and the early studies that were done on the liquid zeolites. Oh, look, we gave this to children, and then we did a hair analysis. Look, there's all this aluminum coming out. We are mobilizing aluminum. Yeah, if you poison somebody with aluminum, you expect it to come out in the hair. So zeolite is a fantastic product if it's the right type. It's not so fantastic if you use it in the wrong ways. So I have 5 minutes, just a little bit on the mercury. Mercury is a big one. All of us have mercury in our systems. Mercury has a special role in toxicity. It's the only toxin that at minute doses destroys the tubulin. Tubulin is the molecule that really goes through all the spaces in our system. It's in the connective tissue, it's inside the nerves, it's inside the cells. It's a scaffolding upon which the mitochondria do their the transport chain of electrons, and if you destroy the tubulin, you destroy the body. And mercury does it at the finest doses. And so, first of all, placing amalgam fillings in a mouth which contain 50% mercury is a crime to humanity, and I would be defending this in front of the medical council or anybody. You know, the literature is so overwhelming of that, and that it's still on the NHS is a crime against you British people. It really is. You know, so, but we have other sources. You know, one is the environmental sources. They did a map of Texas where they looked how much mercury is in the earth. You know, from the gold digging in the old days that stirred up the earth, and the oil mining. You know, they stir up things that are kept safely under the earth. That's now on the surface. And they did a map in Texas with the highest places of mercury, and then a map where the highest amount of autistic children were born, and it was the same map, was an identical map, putting those two on top of each other. The mother passes on 2/3 of her mercury to the firstborn child. And so a simple diagnostic pearl for you guys, if the firstborn child is the one in trouble, it's probably a toxic issue. If it's a later born child, a second or third, they get sick, it's usually Lyme disease. You know, because if the mother has undetected Lyme disease, asymptomatic mother, the Lyme grows and grows and grows, and the later children will get more of it than the early children. But the toxicity in the mother goes down with each child that she has. And the first one gets 2/3. And the first one, if the first one is a boy, he's out of luck, because testosterone has a devastating synergistic effect with mercury. And so in those kids, we work a lot on detoxification and improving their methylation, and you know, getting that whole system going before we treat the Lyme disease or other things. And then, of course, the vaccines. I promised not to talk about the vaccines, and I won't. My best friend in the business got murdered, you know, a few months ago, who was the most outspoken published man on the vaccine issue. That was Jeff Bradstreet in the US. And so since then we all learned to shut up. So here, an important one, I know okay, I'll give myself 3 minutes. It's important that there's a direct relationship. The fetus in the womb is exposed to the mercury of the mother, and there's a direct relationship to the number of mercury amalgam fillings that she has in the mouth. That's what this article says. And you know, also ugly looking things. I don't want to have anything like that in my mouth. This is a study that I was peripherally involved in by Vimy and Fritz Lorscheider. They were professors at the university in Calgary in Canada. They placed amalgam fillings in the jaw of a sheep for 4 days, properly done, you know, rubber dam and a whole bit, 7 amalgam fillings, and then took them out with the suction and rubber dam again, all that, and then had the mercury radio-labeled so they could be seen later on a scan. And 6 weeks later, they scanned the sheep. Remember, this is not killing the sheep or anything, a live sheep, and everything black here is the mercury, so the jaw is impregnated with it, the whole gut, the lymphatic system of the gut is impregnated with it, the structure up here is the kidneys are impregnated, this is the spleen, and all of you, whoever had 7 amalgam fillings for 4 days would look like this. The half-life is 32 years. Now some of you may have had amalgam fillings for 8 days, you would look twice as bad. Or 80 days, that's 20 times as bad. Or even longer than that. I promise you, most of you here in the room would look like the black sheep. You know, and so here's this wonderful study on autism. Basically what they did, this is the number of amalgam fillings from the mother. Yeah, this is over 10 fillings, this is 3 fillings, and this is the healthy group. This is basically when the children were old enough to cut their hair, like when they were about 2 years old, they did a hair analysis, and the healthy children, they found the more mercury they were exposed to, the more they're excreting over the hair, you know, as an avenue of detoxification. The autistic group flatlines. That means no matter how much mercury they're exposed to, they cannot excrete it. And their problem really is excretion. And those of you who have paid attention to me, which one is the main cause of children not being able to excrete their mercury? The electromagnetic radiation that they were exposed to in the womb. Yeah? So let's take a break, and then I do the rest afterwards. I just wanted to make one thing clear. You know, I'm not against the people using cell phones. I'm against there is a responsible use of all these technologies, you know, so that doesn't require any change, really, any massive change. And it's most important to protect the unborn children from it. That is huge, that element. Yeah, I was forced to use a different microphone, so there's not much I can do. Try and get a bit closer. Of course, it's all wireless. So let's go through some of these things. So this is an autistic boy that we treated, and one of the tests for heavy metals that's very available here in the UK is the Methylation test, the memory lymphocyte immune stimulation assay. And what you see here is like the level for methylmercury, very, very high, and then after treatment it's below like a certain threshold, the same for nickel. And we just used our the cilantro foot bath combination that I mentioned before as our primary detox option, which works beautiful. You know, this is how the challenge tests look like when you inject a detox agent in the vein and then collect the urine afterwards. And this is my favorite test, is a urine porphyrin test that's done in a lab in Paris. I hope the lab still stands since yesterday. The email address you may want to write down, contact@labbio.net. The wonderful thing with this test, it only costs about £35, so it's the least expensive test. And the porphyrins are enzymes used in the detoxification cascade, and if they're upregulated, if the amount of them goes high, that means on a regular basis your system is exposed to these things internally. Coproporphyrin is the indicator for lead, precopro for mercury, and euro for aluminum, which are the three main metals that we're tracking in people. We do all sorts of tests. I'm not going to go into the details of that. It's going to be on the memory stick when you get them. IV vitamin C is probably the safest of the detox methods to do that once a week. Of the more interventional ones. Glutathione is a weak way of detoxing. You know, you can, Joachim Mutter, he's the main German toxicologist who works with DMPS. He reviewed studies on EDTA. There's a wonderful study. If you want to get the lead level in a person 50% down, and you get once a week a 3-hour IV with EDTA, how long does it take to get the lead level to half of what it was before? The answer was 7 years. Yeah, 7 years. With mercury, in order to get current, he calculated how many DMPS shots. This is 5 cc's, you know, or 3 milligrams per kilogram. How many DMPS shots does it take to get a 40-year-old person with just normal environmental exposures to close to zero level of mercury? It takes 150 injections. Umura, one of my mentors in New York, did a study on cilantro. How long does it take to get the lead level in a person down when you give them the cilantro with the foot bath? The answer is 39 days. 7 years, 39 days. Yeah? So just letting you know that biological medicine is really succeeding on all fronts, except we don't get the money to publish studies. And most of us who do biological medicine are treating patients, and when you treat patients, you can't really do studies. So you need we need a different system with that. And the only things that are published these days are patentable medicines. Because to do a study, you need money, and to finance it, you need to have a product sales outcome. And so the only things, and after a while, as physicians believe the only medicine that works are the things that are published. And so many things have been forgotten. Here's a wonderful article on curcumin, shows that curcumin on its own has a wonderful detox effect on mercury. And then I'm kind of known for worldwide for my work with chlorella. I'm sorry for the loudspeaker system, but maybe we can turn it down a little bit or something. So chlorella has been shown to detox cadmium, uranium, lead, mercury. This is on methylmercury and preventing dementia, reinvigorating the thymus gland and others. So this is a study I did. It was actually a journal that was here in England, the Journal of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine. It was a wonderful journal, but that went broke also. Was a peer-reviewed journal. And this is the only article that I wrote on the value of detoxing with chlorella and cilantro, but it's in the literature at least that works. I think that's all I want you to know about mercury. So the two big ones in terms of toxins that I mentioned so far is glyphosate and mercury. You need to get those down in chronic illness. And then the big elephant again in the living room is aluminum. So a few things about aluminum. Orally absorbed aluminum is not very toxic on its own. So the thing with the frying pan and the cooking ware or so is all true, but by dimension it's a decoy to deflect from what's really going on. What I want you to see is just a couple of studies. So aluminum is of particular importance with all the neurological disorders. Mercury is a neurotoxin, but mercury has a funny property of being anti-inflammatory. Aluminum, what you need to know, is neurotoxic and pro-inflammatory. Now, most of the neurological illness I see are inflammatory in nature, and therefore the focus has been more and more on the aluminum. Here's this wonderful study published in a good paper that shows that the exposure to paracetamol or acetaminophen during pregnancy can be the sole cause of autism, but always in contact with the backdrop of aluminum toxicity in the unborn child. Here's a little bit on one of the sources of aluminum in us is a vaccine program. I'm not saying it's bad. You have to remember, I'm not anti-vaccine at all. But here's the amounts of aluminum, 0.5 milligrams of aluminum injected in an elephant will make the elephant sick for months. This is one vaccine. And then here's sort of like just a schedule until 9 months of age. That our children are getting if they're submitted to this protocol. So it's a huge cumulative amount. And if you have a kid who cannot excrete aluminum, it's a devastating amount. And the aluminum is added in when you present, let's say, a virus together with a very toxic substance, you get a stronger upregulation of the immune system. So there is a reason for putting it in. And then I looked at the literature, what research has been done to find that aluminum is safe in the vaccines, and that was never done. There's not a single paper in Science anywhere that shows adding aluminum to the vaccines is safe. No safety study done, no damage study done, nothing. And so I leave that standing on its own. But the other source of aluminum is this. So that's England is very, very much affected by the constant spraying of the sky with weather modulating agents. And we collected the air. I'll show you some of the examples. I did the air in America, but the air samples here even look worse, that we're being poisoned from the sky, with this aluminum compounds that are seeded in the air. They don't evaporate after a while. They stay there and they're spread out and make this gray carpet that you're used to in England. And whatever goes up must come down over time. And so we find a huge level of aluminum in people, and it's very scary. And here's some air samples that we took. David Lim is the British researcher who provides us with the deeper research. I want to point out there's the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency again in the US, very conservative agency. They say when you have aluminum in the rain that's over 0.5 micrograms per liter, the population needs to be warned to stay inside the house. And these are the levels that we got. 1,010. This is 2,000 times over this level. This is over 4,000 times that level. This is over 7,000 times that level, just collecting rain samples. Let me see what else. Here's like an article. So the main science behind it is called geoengineering. When you ask the geoengineers, they say, yeah, we did the studies and we advised the government against it. It's not safe. Here down there, like what's in there? Well, there's toxic metals in there, radioactive elements, and mobile aluminum. I got into this strange thing. Me and my partner, Daniela, we were skiing in the Black Forest. And even though I live in the US, I flew here because my kids grew up in England. We took them skiing. And I worked in the Black Forest right on top for a year when I was a young physician. And I was very familiar with the local weather conditions. And so it was a beautiful blue morning, January. And we went skiing. And then the tanker jets came and sprayed the sky. And then because of the inversion of the weather, the blanket of whatever the material was kind of descended down on us. And we all started coughing and getting sick and our eyes tearing. And I had a test done the next day in Cham in Germany. It's called apheresis. I don't want to go into the details of that, but it showed that it had astronomically high levels of aluminum in my blood from that event. And so we collected the snow, and the snow was about 20,000 times over that value. This collecting, so that's when I knew the whole thing with the chemtrails was not a myth or not a paranoid kind of thing, but it was very real, and it's been going on really in a small scale for 40 years, but really on a large scale for 6 or 7 years. And we found some unpleasant things in there that makes it not geoengineering, but something else. Because we found glyphosate in the spray, and we found mycoplasma in the spray, and other researchers found living Lyme spirochetes in the spray. You think about it, what that may mean. So the main detox for aluminum is different forms of silica, and what we're using, again, I pointed out, sort of that there's special forms of zeolite. The one that we have on the table has a 5-to-1 ratio of silica to aluminum. And this form of zeolite strongly extracts aluminum from the system. It's hungry. The natural balance in the earth of silicon and aluminum is 1-to-1. And this is a zeolite that has 5 times more silica in it than aluminum, and it hugely absorbs and attracts aluminum, which is positively charged. But also, Umura's research shows again that cilantro on its own is huge in detoxing aluminum from our system. And so, again, that strange mix of taking cilantro tincture a couple of times a day, usually before meals, and doing a 20-minute ionic foot bath at night may very well be the only method that we need to get the levels down. And since we have daily exposures of that, the skies here in England are sprayed worse than any other country. It's for military reasons, we know that, whatever's behind it, but you're all being poisoned by that. And so you should know about it. My only grudge with that, okay, there maybe need reasons for doing it, but you should be informed about it. You're supposed to be a democracy, it should be transparent, and you're not being told about it, and so I tell you about it. So a little bit on Lyme disease. So I don't have time to go in all the details on Lyme disease, but I've been on board with diagnosing and treating Lyme since 1991. Lida Matman was a friend of mine, and she gave me a Lyme culture, and with my muscle testing, I could very quickly identify. I had the pain clinic at the time, and realized very quickly when I had the culture that 80% of my pain patients really had Lyme disease. And so I went the first few years treating it with antibiotics, and then slowly moved in treating it without antibiotics. And so here's a white cell surrounded by spirochetes, and I like this picture because it really explains how Lyme is different from any other illness. This white cell is supposed to go after the bugs and eat the bugs, but this white cell is being invaded and completely overwhelmed by the microbes. And it's the same, when you see they still do that in Alaska, hunting bears, with dogs. One dog had no chance against a grizzly bear, but you put 30 dogs on a grizzly bear, the grizzly bear has no chance. There's sort of like that. And then also you need to know that the spirochetes move at a speed of 2,000 times faster than the fastest white blood cell can move in our system. And so it's just based on the sheer speed of that, it's not easy for our system to keep a tab on this. And then the last thing I want to say, and again you think about it, syphilis has 27 genes. The original studies on the new version of Lyme disease that were spreading from Lyme, Connecticut, westward, had 137, and now they've clocked Lyme spirochetes that had well over 600 genes. That means there's somebody sitting in a laboratory manufacturing these things, because that cannot happen. There's no bacteria that anywhere else has more than 30 genes. And suddenly a bacteria emerging has over 600 genes that can only be done in a lab. And we have evidence that that's so. And so we really, when we talk about Lyme disease, we talk about very, very different creatures within that. You may have the German natural variety that lived in the Black Forest, that has less than syphilis. You give like 2 weeks of antibiotics, you're done. But you take a 600 plus DNA sort of elongated version that is so adaptive, that has so many tricks built in. It's got genetic pieces of herpes viruses, it's got genetic pieces of mycoplasma, and it has a huge penetration. You need to go after these things. You need antivirals, you need anti-mycoplasma agents, you need antibacterial agents to get on top of that. And we have no lab that can differentiate whether you got the 600 plus gene version or the 25 gene version. It looks the same. The clinical picture initially is the same, but the treatment outcome is very, very different. So I just want to put that at the beginning here. Here's the nymph, and I had a small practice in England a few years ago, and I tested every patient. I only saw chronically ill patients. I tested every patient for Lyme with Armin's lab, that he had then. And it was 8 out of 10 of my English patients were testing positive for chronic Lyme disease, unrelated to what their illness was. Some had chronic pain, some had neurological problems, some learning disabilities, some autism, 80% positive for Lyme. And at the time, I was the only physician in England even who knew how to spell the word, that it wasn't Lyme's disease, it was Lyme disease without the apostrophe S. I was the only one then who knew how to spell the word. And so I very quickly withdrew actually practicing here because I realized it wasn't safe, and a very good friend of mine who worked at Breakspear, Dr. Hugh, had to spend tens of thousands of pounds, defending herself for making the diagnosis. And I know Jeanne Monroe had her run in with that, sort of said, the way, any stagnant system deals with things when people find something new, well, let's first squash the new people and see where that goes. And so you just have to know that it's a backdrop here in England that it's very difficult for physicians to thrive in this environment. And so we had a similar thing in the US, in my state. There were several physicians that made the diagnosis of Lyme disease and reported their cases to the CDC, which is always a red flag in the US. All of the 6 doctors that were there that I diagnosed Lyme disease, but I never reported my cases because it said, when you look at the orders that we get from above, if you have a positive ELISA test, you have to report. So I just avoided the ELISA test. I just went straight to the Western blot. And I was contacted by my medical board and said, well, here's what you wrote. If it's a positive ELISA, I have to report it. I didn't do a ELISA test. So I was off the hook, but the other guys had to undergo a psychiatric evaluation whether they're sane, because I made the diagnosis of something that obviously could not possibly exist in our state. Just so the general public here, just to kind of know what the backdrop is, why the movement has been rather slow in coming forward with it. Here's just a little bit, the symptoms, the MS, myelopathy, brain tumors, encephalopathy, meningitis, encephalitis, manic depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, anorexia. I've seen 7 cases of anorexic girls. They all had Lyme disease. They were all cured by treating it. Chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, Parkinson, that's all the... And important to know that only 24% of people with Lyme ever get any joint problems. Same with the bull's-eye rash, less than 25% of people ever have a bull's-eye rash. Sarcoidosis is very common in the area in Germany where I'm from. And here, for me, that was the most important article on Lyme that ever came out. Judy McCloskey from Switzerland, really making the point very clearly that Alzheimer's disease, there's no Alzheimer's disease without spirochetes in the brain. And I think we're going to hear another lecture on that today, so I'm going to skip that. I was the one who blew the horn on autism and Lyme disease. There was 1999 or 2000, I had enough, with all the new cases of autism, and so I tested 10 consecutive children for Lyme disease, and 8 out of the 10 were positive. And so, however, these were children that I treated for Lyme for at least a year before, and they all tested positive. Then the government kind of jumped on me, and they repeated the study without treating the people, and did the cheap Western blot in the local hospital, and they found no difference between the normal population and the autism group. Well, the Western blot is a test based on a functioning immune system, so it's negative. If you're so sick that you don't have an immune response, it will be negative. And so I treated the autistic kids, and then 8 out of 10 actually turned out to have Lyme disease. And so autism for me is Lyme disease acquired in the womb, and I stick with that. So here, and then Robert Bransfield, Jeff Wolfman, and others, we're all friends, Andrew Usman, then followed that, a few years later with a number of really seething, wonderful papers, establishing that, that there's a high incidence of Lyme disease in the autistic patient community. Okay, so typical lab indicators, I think that may be interesting to some of you, that that we can diagnose Lyme of the regular lab without having to do, I don't know how it is here now, but in the US, really like to use Epigenetics or one of the specialty labs that really makes the diagnosis more accurately. The patient has to pay out of pocket, and the test just for Lyme is about $400, which is for some of my patients their monthly income. And so we try to make the diagnosis in a reliable way of the lab. So the first thing we look at is the low white blood count. if it's under 5,000. This is just for the medical people here. You will not see a chronic symptomatic case of Lyme if the white count is 7,000 or 8,000. The illness that they currently have is not caused by the Lyme spirochetes. Yeah. Lyme is an immunosuppressive illness. The white count will be under 5,000 or under. The other one is the MCV, the mean corpuscular volume. Your red blood cells, as they age, they get bigger. And if there's not enough young ones coming in, the spleen doesn't dismantle the old blood cells and they get bigger and bigger. And that's the MCV. And the MCV, of course, is the cheapest indicator for the methylation deficit that I mentioned in my first part of the talk. You know? So it's a $2 blood test that will tell me whether the patient has a genetic or epigenetic methylation deficit. And I test for the things, for the list of things I gave before, the B vitamins, largely the methylated folate, and a few minerals. And that has been wonderful. You know, so this test, the two things I mentioned so far, cost in the US $2. You know, and since I'm used to work with the patient population, they have to pay their own money. I'm not having the luxury kind of office, you know, that some of the people that lecture at other times to you, they have the highbrow offices, you know, where people come in with the pockets full of money and just want to get well, and they don't have. I'm coming from the other side, you know, sort of where I treat regular people that are the end of the rope. So interesting, the elevated fasting blood sugar, I got that from Dr. Boroscano, that we know the insulin resistance, you can do very, very expensive tests, very complicated tests, but you can just look at the damn fasting blood sugar. You know, it should be in the 80s or even high 70s. Okay, I get the sign in the back. The low alkaline phosphatase is a general indicator for zinc deficiency. The moderately elevated LDL is a very, very predictive sign of chronic Lyme disease, you know, the low density lipoprotein. Cholesterol mildly elevated, and the LDL sticks out. It's moderately high, not astronomically high. Yeah, that's the most important lab indicators that you please kind of notice. Western blot test, you know, there's different testing that we do. The co-infections, Babesia, FL 1953, Ehrlichia, Rickettsia, Bartonella, Mycoplasma. And then there's opportunistic infections, the parasites, the mold, the viruses. And so what I really want to get to is my treatment. So here it is, artemisinin. Great article, shows that there's literature on treating schistosomiasis, the CMV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and lower down, trematodes, fungi, yeast, and bacteria. That kind of keyed me onto this, and then found papers, wonderful treatment for herpes type 6, which often travels along with Lyme disease. Here, an article on hepatitis B, wonderful, wonderful results with that. And then an article that came out, when you make artemisinin liposomal by combining it with a phospholipid, it increases the effectiveness hugely and the half-life 5 times longer. So you get, with 1 dose a day, you get a 24-hour coverage with that. And so what we're doing, we have artemisinin just got a Nobel Prize in medicine. So I was just contacted with by my medical board a few weeks ago that I'm prescribing this drug that nobody ever heard about called artemisinin. And I sent them a letter back a few days later, well, sorry guys, but it just got a Nobel Prize, so there's other people that have heard about it too. And so we don't know yet how that is going to turn out, but so we're mixing artemisinin in a blender with phospholipids, and then put it in a $25 ultrasound machine and vibrating it, and it comes out as the most potent treatment for Lyme disease that I've ever seen. It's beautiful, it's smooth, there is very little bumps in the road. You don't get the serious die-off effects that you get with antibiotics, because you're killing the bugs inside the biofilm. Yeah, I'm making the point here that I made in the beginning by doing that. And so It's going to be on Linghardt Institute on the website, the Lyme cocktail that I recommend, adding a few herbs together and how to make things liposomal. There's a little one-page instruction sheet. And I'm reminded from the back that my time is up. So here's the Lyme cocktail. So it's actually going to be on the PowerPoint when you get that. And I just want to say mycoplasma we treat with olive oil. And then I use, in my chronically ill patient, I use a lot of bee venom. You know, we inject bee venom as a wonderful agent that kills Lyme disease like nothing I've seen before. But it's a bit uncomfortable, and there's sort of the special patient that really wants to stick with me and really kind of wants to reach higher levels of health than they had before they got ill. Okay, and then the last thing is on the molds. We treat molds. There comes in the role for glutathione. It's a mix of glutathione and alpha lipoic acid that mobilizes the mold biotoxins in the liver and gets them out. Okay, and I know I wanted to talk about the glymphatic system. Kind of Google that one. You know, the new knowledge about how the brain clears itself. It only happens at night. The brain cells shrink by 60%, make space for avenues, for roads in the brain. The garbage can be moved out. And for that, it needs high levels of melatonin. You know, so it's again, the deep sleep is needed at night for the brain to clear itself. And you cannot get deep sleep with the wireless on or with the cordless phone, with the cordless phone in the kitchen, because it pulses at 10 to 12 hertz currents throughout your brain through the night, and all you get is a light alpha state, and that's not what the brain needs to clear itself. So that's the end of my talk, and thanks for listening to me.